Israel's strike on Qatar was not just another episode of regional instability. It was one of the most serious economic and geopolitical blows the United States has faced in decades, and all this happened with Donald Trump sitting in the White House. Qatar can hardly be called a minor player. It hosts the largest American military base in the Persian Gulf, and its colossal gas reserves supply both Europe and Asia. But when the strike occurred, Trump remained silent until it was all over. That pause echoed across the Arab world and sparked doubts about whether Washington can still be relied upon. For the Arab League, where irritation and cooperation have always coexisted, the sense of betrayal was unmistakable. And in the East, such moments shape relations for generations. The truth is, this is not only about Qatar. It is a symbol of the collapse of trust between the United States and the Arab world. And Russia immediately seized on this vacuum, offering weapons, security cooperation, and respect. At the same time, BRICS is no longer seen as an experiment, but increasingly resembles the foundation of a new economic system, while the dollar keeps losing ground. We are witnessing not just a diplomatic misstep, but the slow unraveling of American dominance. This strike shook the entire Middle East, but the key point is not the attack itself. It is Trump's reaction, or more precisely, his lack of one. Not long ago, he toured the capitals of the Gulf, shook hands with monarchs, smiled for the cameras, and promised strong partnerships. He wanted to show that America was reliable. But when Qatar came under attack, that image collapsed in an instant. It is still unclear whether Israel warned Washington in advance or whether the White House was caught off guard. But the fact is confirmed even by Doha. Trump's phone call came only 20 minutes after the strike. On paper, that may seem trivial, but in this region, timing is everything. Every second signals intent. That delay sparked doubts in Arab capitals. Was Washington complicit, caught unprepared, or simply unwilling to defend an ally it had called indispensable? The stakes here are enormous. Qatar is far from a secondary state. With one of the highest GDP per capita figures, it controls about 13% of the world's proven gas reserves and exports more than 80 million tons of LNG annually. This gas keeps Europe afloat after the loss of Russian pipelines and powers Asia, where Japan, South Korea, China, and India are bound by long-term contracts. When Qatar is destabilized, energy markets convulse, prices climb, supply chains strain, and economies from Berlin to Tokyo feel the shock. For Washington, Qatar's role is even more strategic. Al Udeid Air Base is the largest American installation in the Middle East and the hub of US operations. More than 10,000 troops are stationed there, directing missions in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan. Without it, America's military presence in the region would collapse almost instantly. So what signal does America send if a country hosting such a base is attacked and the president limits himself to a phone call 20 minutes later? In Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, Kuwait, and Cairo, the question is the same. If Qatar, with its wealth and American troops, can be struck without protection, how safe are they? And Qatar's role goes even further. Its sovereign wealth fund manages nearly $500 billion in assets, from European banks and car makers to prime real estate in New York and London. If a country so deeply integrated into Western markets can be treated as expendable, then what are American promises really worth? Trump's delay looks all the more painful against the backdrop of his recent attempts to build personal ties. He praised the rulers of the Gulf, cast himself as a negotiator who brought stability, and promised to strengthen trust. But when the real test came, Washington failed. It was precisely this gap between grand promises and inaction that struck Arab capitals the hardest. Now, anxiety is growing inside the United States itself. For the Arab League, this is no longer an isolated incident, but proof that America no longer guarantees protection even for close partners. The delayed phone call, the absence of an immediate response, and the sense that Israel acts without restraint undermine faith in the United States as the Gulf's security guarantor. The Middle East rarely forgets such moments. Lost trust is difficult to rebuild, and when it disappears, other powers quickly fill the void. Russia, China, and BRICS are already moving to occupy that space. That is why this episode is being called a turning point. It is not only a story about Qatar, it is the beginning of a broader collapse of American influence in the region. From this moment, the consequences reached far beyond the battlefield. Energy flows are shifting, alliances are weakening, financial networks are searching for new anchors, and Washington's rivals are racing to expand their influence. For decades, Arab states tolerated American dominance for one reason: Washington promised protection. That understanding underpinned every deal, every arms purchase, every political compromise. But by the time of Israel's strike on Qatar, the situation had already changed. Many Arab economies had quietly begun looking east. In several countries, trade with China had surpassed trade with the United States. Russia was no longer just a distant power. It was supplying weapons, signing nuclear energy agreements, and strengthening political ties. At the same time, Gulf monarchs were experimenting with selling oil in Yuan, preparing for a world where the dollar was no longer the only option. The strike on Qatar did not create this trend. It merely accelerated it. Gradual discontent turned into open defiance. Russia did not miss the moment. Moscow immediately offered itself as an alternative. While Washington hesitated, the Kremlin reached out directly to regional leaders, offering security guarantees, intelligence sharing, and a promise of non-interference. This was exactly what Arab rulers had been waiting for, but never heard from Trump. Even diplomatically, Moscow moved swiftly. The foreign minister sharply condemned the strike, in contrast to Washington's silence. The difference was stark. Regional leaders noticed it. They know Russia can be tough, but they value its consistency in keeping commitments. And in a region where broken promises are remembered for generations, that matters enormously. The United Arab Emirates expanded purchases of Russian weapons. Egypt signed major energy contracts with Moscow. Saudi Arabia openly coordinates oil policy with Russia through OPEC+. Anger over Qatar pushed even more countries closer to Moscow, deciding it offers the respect Washington had withdrawn. The greatest danger is that Russia is no longer merely competing for influence. It is increasingly being seen as the security guarantor of the Persian Gulf. And once such a perception takes hold, history shows it is almost impossible to reverse. By failing to act at the moment of the strike on Qatar, Trump only reinforced this view. The consequences are already visible, and Washington is paying the price. Oil markets are rising, energy imports are becoming more expensive, and defense contracts that for decades went to American firms are shifting east. At the same time, global demand for dollars in trade is falling. More and more countries are experimenting with settling energy deals in other currencies. These are not hypothetical risks, but real blows to the American economy, and they are unfolding faster than Washington can react. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have drawn their conclusions. If the United States cannot be relied upon, then it can no longer serve as the foundation of their security and economy. That is why they are hedging risks and strengthening ties with Russia and China. And BRICS is gaining an ever greater role in shaping a new order where the United States is no longer the center. For decades, the dollar was the backbone of global oil trade. Every barrel, every OPEC deal was priced in dollars. This gave Washington immense influence, both economic and political. But now, the system is showing cracks. What once seemed unthinkable is already happening. Oil is being sold outside the dollar. The crisis around Qatar only accelerated the process. Saudi Arabia quietly accepted Yuan for part of its shipments. The United Arab Emirates began considering deals outside the dollar. And in 2023, Qatar even signed an oil agreement with India, denominated in rupees. This was not just a diversification move. It was a signal that trust in America's role is fading. The dollar's hegemony rested on three pillars: stability, reliability, and partnership. Now Arab leaders are questioning all three. If the United States cannot be trusted as a protector, why should its currency remain the backbone of trade? Why not shift to the yuan, the ruble, or BRICS regional payment systems? This is not a distant prospect, but a process already underway. So stay tuned and turn on notifications to follow the developments. See you in the next video.